Hi, it's Katrina. Sand tufas. These strange towers in the desert look like they come from another planet. Located in Mono Lake, California, these melting sci-fi villages are actually tufas, impressive and unique geological formations made up of a strange form of calcium carbonate. Water from freshwater springs full of calcium flows through alkaline lake water rich in carbonates, forming these spires, columns, and mounds, all elements of an incredible city. These tufa towers can reach over 30 feet tall. These tufa towers from California have been exposed by extreme changes of the streams that usually feed Mono Lake. These streams were diverted starting in 1941 by the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. The lake began to dry out, and the water level dropped, revealing these incredible structures. There are at least 3 separate kinds of tufa in Mono Lake. They can be made out of crystals, sand, or limestone. This tufa offers perfect nesting sites and roofs for birds like a natural high-rise condo. Over the years, these enormous towers slowly decayed until all that's left is what you see now. While the landscape may look mysterious, like something from another planet, it's a spectacular natural geological phenomenon. Mitla, the place of the dead. The archaeological site of Mitla in Mexico is one of the most mysterious places associated with the ancient Zapotec culture. We can find the site today in the Oaxaca Valley, and it was originally inhabited around 100 AD, then later abandoned around 650 AD. Mitla started out as a fortified village and blossomed into a massive religious center. The ancient Zapotec believed Mitla served as a magical gateway between the realm of the living and the realm of the dead. The elite members of their society were buried here so that they would have an easier time transitioning to the underworld. Today, the site is made up of 5 structures still standing on the valley floor. These were once ancient ceremonial structures where the Zapotec priests could communicate with the dead. Researchers with the National Institute of Anthropology and History believe there could be even more structures hiding underground and are hoping to use ground-penetrating radar to look for more chambers and passages. Underwater Mordor. Researchers exploring the Indian Ocean came across a mysterious underwater volcano, or rather the remains of a collapsed underwater volcano. And shockingly, it bears an uncanny resemblance to the Eye of Sauron from The Lord of the Rings. There are also 2 other seafloor structures near it that look like other places in Middle-earth, and so they have dubbed the whole area Underwater Mordor. The Eye is by far the most fascinating structure here. It's an oval depression about 4 miles long and 3 miles wide. And while it might look like the evil eye of some mythical tyrant, it's the caldera of a huge deep-sea volcano. The caldera, which is the mouth of the volcano, stands 980 feet tall above the rim. It even has the impression of eyelids, like the volcano's eye might blink at you. The tall cone-shaped peak at its core looks exactly like a pupil. Underwater Mordor is located 174 miles from Christmas Island near Australia, sitting at a depth of over 10,000 feet. Near the volcano, researchers with Australia's Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization also identified small sea mountains covered in volcanic cones. They named these mountains Barad-dûr after Sauron's stronghold, where Frodo nearly lost the ring to the evil orcs. Death Valley. Death Valley in California is one of the most mysterious places anywhere in America. Not only is it one of the most inhospitable places on the planet, often reaching average daily temperatures of over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, but it's also home to a hidden underground city, according to Native American lore. The Paiute Indians who lived here centuries before Europeans ever arrived told stories about a vast underground kingdom called Shin-Au-Av, which translates roughly to Ghost Land. They believed that beneath Death Valley was an enormous city with subterranean passages to the underworld. The legends around the city involve a chief whose wife died. Stricken by grief, the chief followed his wife to the land of the dead, helped by spirits down beneath the sandy surface of Death Valley and into a network of underground tunnels. There, he had to battle beasts and evil spirits until he reached a glowing light deep under the earth. This was the underground sun, bathing the subterranean realm in daylight. The chief crossed a rocky bridge spanning a bottomless canyon of darkness and finally arrived in the spirit land, where he found thousands of his dead ancestors all dancing happily in a land of bliss and joy. There could be more to the story. In 1931, Dr. F. Bruce Russell from Cincinnati claimed to find a maze of catacombs underneath Death Valley while inspecting some mining operations. The tunnels might be real. According to Russell, he witnessed a mine shaft sink beneath the sand and open up into a mysterious underground world. Russell and another man descended into the subterranean realm, where they found the skeletons of men who were over 9 feet tall and wearing clothes made from the hides of unknown animals. Nobody has ever found evidence of the underground place in modern times, and the painful fact is that nobody knows if Dr. Russell was telling the truth or if he was completely crazy. There could be something under Death Valley, but nobody has really been looking. Might be worth a shot. What do you think? Could there be a mysterious ancient lost city in Death Valley? Let me know what you think in the comments below. The Keyhole Burial Mounds. 1,700 years ago, during the Kofun era of Japan, the nobles and members of the ruling class were buried in enormous funerary mounds. The strange thing is that from the sky, some of the burial mounds look like perfectly shaped keyholes. Located in Sakai City in Osaka Prefecture, one of the most famous is known as the Mozu Kofugen Keyhole, and it is surrounded by a wide moat. The strange thing is that nobody knows why these mounds were made in the shape of a keyhole. What did the trapezoid and circle mean to people in the ancient world? Many of the mounds are several hundred feet across, and they were almost always surrounded by a moat and terracotta soldiers, meant to protect the wealthy noble in the afterlife and show off their status when they were alive. The Mozu complex used to be home to over 100 tombs, but many were raided over the years or destroyed during World War II. 40 survive today, with the largest allegedly belonging to Emperor Nintoku, who ruled in the 16th century. It's the largest tomb in Japan, and according to Heritage Daily, it covers an area twice as long as the base of the Great Pyramid of the Pharaoh Khufu in Giza. But much of the emperor's life is shrouded in myth, and some don't even know if he ever existed. His life and his reign are all mixed up with all kinds of stories, so it's hard to know if he actually ruled or was some type of hero. And so the mystery remains of who is actually buried here. The biggest issue with figuring it out is that the Japanese government has refused to allow archaeologists to open the tomb. It's considered a national treasure and a sacred burial ground, and so it remains unexplored to this day. Do you think the Japanese government is right in preventing archaeologists from studying the tomb? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Reverse waterfall. In 2020, a year that was a nightmare for everyone, something very mysterious happened in Australia. Aerial footage caught the moment that a waterfall went in reverse. The waterfall wasn't cascading down the side of the cliff, but curving up and spraying backwards onto the land. And as if that wasn't amazing enough, the mist created its very own rainbow. But what's the deal with the reverse waterfall? Does this thing actually exist? Turns out it's all just a trick of the wind. When the video was taken, the coast of New South Wales was being battered by torrential rains, and many people were ordered to evacuate. There were winds raging at upwards of 45 miles an hour. At the Royal National Park, the wind pushed the water backwards so that the liquid streaming off the cliffs went up instead of down. This isn't something that normally happens, but it goes to show the power of Mother Nature. The wind was so strong it could push a waterfall the wrong way. Thankfully, things have calmed down and people could return. But what about the waterfalls? They are back to magnificently plummeting over the cliffs of New South Wales and into the beautiful blue sea, the direction that they should be. The face on the cliff. Louise Coe, who lives in Cornwall in the UK, was out for a hike along a local coastal pathway with her husband when the pair spotted something bizarre in the rock. Much to the couple's surprise, they were looking at a human face, chiseled out of the cliff wall at Bedruthen Steps. It was eerie and unnerving, and they did not know how the mysterious face had gotten there. It looked like it was carved by ancient people who lived in the UK thousands of years ago. But Louise and her husband had walked the same trail countless times and had never seen it before. It must have been recent. The best guess they have is that a landslide caused some of the cliff to break apart, and the destabilization revealed the face of a person looking out across the sea. While it does look like a human face, the most logical explanation is that it was made by nature, and the fact that it looks like a face is just a coincidence. San Luis Valley. The San Luis Valley, which reaches from Colorado into New Mexico, has an extremely old and rich history. It was home to many Native American cultures as far back as the Clovis and Folsom cultures 11,000 years ago. It is also home to many UFO sightings. They were so frequent that a woman named Judy Messeline decided to do something about it and actually set up a UFO watchtower on her land. She then would invite people up there with her so that they could examine possible UFO sightings together. And guess what? It worked. Just since 2000, there have been 50 UFO-like sightings from that watchtower by dozens of people. The valley was once considered the #1 UFO hotspot per capita, with 257 sightings per 10,000 people. Also in recent years, there have been many reports of animals dying with mysterious cut wounds. There's some spooky folklore about a horse named Snippy that looks like it was sacrificed in some strange ritual. Some have linked the horse's death to UFOs. Local investigators said there were a number of darkened patches that looked like scorch or exhaust marks found near the dead horse, and there was no blood around the body. Detectives asked for help, and an Air Force-funded team from CU Boulder, as well as a forestry aide with the U.S. Forestry Service, qualified in radiological monitoring, have been asked to bring in a radiation device to measure for possible radiation in the area. The valley encompasses about 8,000 square miles, so there is plenty of room to witness paranormal activity. An ancient Irish tomb. The Creevy Keel Court tomb in Ireland dates back over 4,500 years and is one of the most mysterious burial sites in the country. Even though we can find court-style tombs all throughout Ireland, this is by far the finest example found. It was built in the prehistoric period, yet continued to be used by ancient people all the way until the early Christian period. When the tomb was first catalogued in 1909, we knew it as the Giant's Graves. The locals even referred to it as the Castle of Enchantment. Local Irish in the region have reported all kinds of strange things happening around the tomb. In 1979, resident Gerald Keogh claimed there were lights coming from inside the tomb, lights that were certainly being used by little people, aka leprechauns. I don't think leprechauns had anything to do with the tomb, though. An ancient tribe of humans probably used it in ritual burials, as well as for ceremonies worshiping their pagan gods. After a few centuries, it's likely the locals forgot what the tomb was for. This would have inspired all kinds of stories, which morphed and changed through the years all the way until modern times. But some people believe there are leprechauns holding midnight parties in the ruins. Mysterious underwater sinkhole. There is a mysterious underwater sinkhole near General Santos City in the Philippines. This sinkhole continues to grow bigger every year, affecting over 1,000 families living in the area. As the underwater anomaly gets larger and larger, it creeps closer to shore and threatens to swallow the houses of those living in the city. What's really shocking is that for the last 30 years, as the mysterious sinkhole has grown bigger, residents have resisted moving. They have lived their whole lives on the shores of General Santos City in stilt houses, and they do not want to leave. But whether they want to won't matter much when their houses get gobbled up by an underwater hole. The hole appeared suddenly 3 decades ago and just keeps growing, and scientists don't even know what it really is. It appears to be some kind of collapsed underwater wall, extending over 300 feet into the sea. It's a deep blue color, different from all the water surrounding it, and as it creeps closer to the shore and starts swallowing up sand, the hole turns an ugly black color. Unfortunately, officials have already ordered families living in the area to leave their homes. They have set aside a sizable chunk of land for them to rebuild. Recently, the hole swallowed an entire fish aggregating device 150 feet from the shore. It's only a matter of time before it swallows houses and nobody can stop it. The Immortal Battery. Physics professor at University of Oxford, Robert Walker, acquired a very interesting device in the 1800s. Walker somehow got his hands on a battery, a simplistic device used to push a hanging metal ball back and forth between a pair of small bells. Over 175 years later, the Oxford electric bell is still ringing. It's rung over 10 billion times, and the battery shows no signs of slowing down anytime soon. It's now known as the most durable battery in the world, an immortal source of power. What makes it so fascinating is that this piece of technology is a complete mystery to the experts. Nobody knows how it's functioned for so long, or how long it will continue to work. To find out, experts would have to crack it open, and nobody wants to be the one who ruins the historic battery. What scientists do know is that the battery appears to be made of alternating disks of silver, zinc, sulfur, and some other mysterious materials. When put together, these things generate low currents of electricity. The current is so low that you can barely hear the bell ringing. It's just a delicate kind of vibration between the two bells. It is one of the longest-running science experiments in the world, and even today, nobody has been able to replicate it. Ancient navigation charts. In Micronesia, the Marshall Islands consist of 34 coral atolls. In total, it's over 1,000 tiny islands and islets spread out across a huge area of hundreds of miles of ocean. In order to properly maintain links between all of these small islands and the tiny communities living on them, the ancient islanders built seafaring canoes. These vessels were pretty simple and allowed for the islanders to travel from place to place. But finding their way from one island to another proved to be a bit more difficult. And so they came up with a fascinating piece of technology. They devised specialized charts which could track the locations of these islands along with the wave patterns. Now, these island charts weren't maps drawn on paper. The islanders obviously didn't have the advanced tools and technology that we have today. Instead, they made their charts out of wooden sticks. They put together a kind of rectangular box with thin sticks, with other sticks inside the box running horizontally, vertically, and diagonally. There are even some curved sticks to represent wave swells. The islanders then used tiny shells fastened to the sticks to represent the physical positions of the islands. The biggest map was known as a rebelib, showing a huge piece of the Marshall Islands. In order to train seafarers, they had a chart called the Matang, which was specifically designed for training navigators. Even more interesting is that they didn't simply take these maps with them, they had to memorize them. Still, these rudimentary maps allowed the islanders to make their way around their little part of the world with total ease. Unbreakable Roman glass. Perhaps one of the most famous lost inventions of the ancient world is unbreakable Roman glass. Also known as Roman flexible glass, this invention has been lost to time, and its very existence is technically unconfirmed. But there are many historical accounts that talk about this impressive material, so many historians believe it really did exist. This unbreakable flexible glass could be dropped or thrown and could withstand heavy damage without shattering into a million pieces. The element of flexibility in glass is something that not even modern technology has been able to figure out. The closest invention of modern science is the tempered glass that we now see in phones and all kinds of protective equipment. But unfortunately, nobody knows who invented this spectacular technology. That's because the inventor didn't live long enough to share it with anyone besides the Roman Emperor Tiberius Caesar. The legend goes that the inventor wanted to share his secret invention with the emperor, so he brought him a glass bowl that could not be broken. But the emperor feared such a remarkable creation could cause the sudden and catastrophic depreciation of gold and silver. He looked at it as a new kind of precious metal, which would devalue all the precious metal Rome had in her stockpile. To protect his assets, the emperor ordered his head to be cut off and his secret buried with him. The lost technology of the Egyptians. Up until around the 7th century BC, there wasn't a lot of iron present in Egypt. Iron never really became common until the Assyrians invaded. The Egyptians never liked it because they associated iron with the evil Egyptian deity Seth, who ruled the central deserts of Africa. So what does this have to do with ancient Egyptian technology? The lack of iron is a major issue when it comes to explaining how the ancient Egyptians built so many monumental structures without using iron tools. Their greatest temples, underground tombs, and of course the pyramids were mostly made from solid basalt, granite, and diorite. These are extremely hard stones that are difficult to shape even with iron tools. But according to pretty much all archaeological evidence found at these sites, the only tools the Egyptians had were made of bronze. What I'm trying to say here is that whatever technology was used to create these megalithic structures 4,500 years ago, it almost certainly was not brass chisels and stone hammers. In general, the tool you're using to carve something has to be stronger than that thing. The truth is that we simply don't know what tools the Egyptians used to shape their giant obelisks and perfectly smooth stone blocks. The lost Roman herb. In the days of ancient Rome, there was an herb called silphium. It was a small plant with hardy roots, stumpy leaves, and beautiful yellow flowers. The plant also oozed with sap that the Romans found delicious and extremely useful. By the end of the Roman Empire, the plant was literally worth its weight in gold. Nobody knows how the Romans figured it out, but they managed to come up with an almost endless list of uses for this little herb. They used its stalks in soups, they ate its roots dipped in vinegar, they created perfume, and even used its sap as a garnish for eating flamingo brains. It was a major ingredient in Roman cuisine. It also had medical applications. Its juice was an aphrodisiac in the bedroom, and perhaps most surprisingly, it was used as the first effective form of birth control. The shape of the plant seeds were shaped exactly like a heart, or at least the cartoon version of a heart you send to someone like an emoji. Historians believe it was the silphium seeds which were responsible for that very symbol which we associate with romance to this very day. Sadly, the plant was so important and so popular that it was picked to death. The ancient historian Pliny the Elder wrote that the very last silphium plant was plucked and given to Emperor Nero around the year 54 AD. The Romans miraculously came up with the world solution to pretty much everything, then used it to extinction. So I wanted to give a big shout out to Carolyn Talon and Mr. Hutch. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the Origins Explained family. The Beijing Ancient Observatory. There are many places on Earth that were once used as observatories, places like Stonehenge and Göbekli Tepe. One of the oldest actual stellar observatories was built a little more recently in the year 1442 by the Ming Dynasty of China. They built it over the bones of a smaller, less advanced observatory that had been established over 200 years earlier in 1227. This observatory was never equipped with telescopes, but they did use some pretty interesting ancient instruments to help with their studies into the sky. They had large cartography tools like an oversized sextant, an azimuth theodolite, and even an armillary sphere. These instruments may sound like a bunch of mumbo-jumbo, and that's because you probably don't use them in your daily life. Me neither. These were ancient tools used to measure stellar distances. It was the best the Chinese could do at the time to actually measure how far a certain celestial body was from the Earth. The Great Wall of Gorgan. The Great Wall of Gorgan was one of the most impressive architectural feats accomplished in the ancient world. It's longer than the Antonine Wall and Hadrian's Wall put together. It was constructed during the latter part of the 5th century and remained occupied for about 200 years by the Sasanian Empire. This isn't exactly the most famous empire in all of history. They were founded in the year 224 AD after the collapse of the Parthian Empire. Their territory stretched across a huge part of the eastern Mediterranean, all the way up to what is now Pakistan. They lived in parts of Central Asia and all the way down to southern Arabia. They are considered by historians to be the last Persian imperial dynasty before the Muslim conquest starting in 633. They were also the peak of ancient Iranian culture, with beautiful works of art, fantastic architectural displays, and impressive fortification technology. The Great Wall of Gorgan was a massive system of defensive lines across their northern border. It was specifically built to protect their domain from the White Huns, also called the Alans. The wall was built from pretty primitive materials, just mud shaped into bricks, and yet it was massive, with a width of over 30 feet lined on one side by a huge earthen bank and a ditch. But this wasn't just a wall. It was an entire blockade of over 38 fortresses spread out across intervals and standardized barracks that housed soldiers. It took an estimated 36,000 soldiers to man this huge barrier and protect the empire. But the wall, sadly, was not enough to protect them from the onslaught of the Muslim army. Within just 5 short years, the entire Sassanid Empire had been defeated, and then absorbed into the Islamic Caliphate. The Ziggurat of Ur. The Ziggurat of Ur is a phenomenal architectural invention that was created over 4,100 years ago. It had tiered levels, which probably made it easier to build such a massive structure. Ziggurats can be found all over Iran and Iraq. They were once used for religious rituals and as administrative hubs for the ruling priests and kings of old Mesopotamia. Yet there is none more impressive than the Great Ziggurat of Ur. It was first uncovered in the 1920s, then fully excavated by workers with the Pennsylvania Museum in Philadelphia and the British Museum in London. They uncovered a massive rectangular pyramid oriented directly to true north. There were 3 giant staircases which led from the gate to the first terrace, then a single staircase going up to the second terrace, and a final staircase going up to the great temple at the top. Amazingly, the whole thing is made of bricks and mud, plain old mud shaped into bricks, baked to be hard and then stacked one on top of the other. Some of these bricks weighed as much as 33 pounds. The entire bottom portion of the ziggurat took about 720,000 of these bricks to complete. Here's an interesting difference between ziggurats and pyramids. The ziggurats in Mesopotamia were made of mud, which was easy to handle from a primitive technological standpoint, whereas the pyramids were made of wildly hard rock. And so it's not as much about the tools used to make this structure as it is the resources needed to pull it off. It was an incredibly advanced piece of architecture for its time, and built with impressive ingenuity considering a large chunk of it is still standing. Decarbonizing furnace. Archaeologists in China have discovered an ancient decarbonization furnace. This impressive piece of technology dates back to the Warring States period, between 475 and 221 BC. It was discovered inside the ruins of an ancient iron foundry at the archaeological site of the Huduan ruins in Henan province. A decarbonization furnace might not sound like that big of a deal, but it was a pretty remarkable invention almost 2,500 years ago. It was discovered inside a workshop which was used for casting tools and weapons. They also found ceramic products, tools relating to cast iron, and an ordinary firing furnace. If you're not sure what a decarbonization furnace is, I'll quickly explain. In simple terms, it is a specialized furnace used in metallurgy to remove carbon from something like iron. The metal must be heated to a temperature of over 1100 degrees Fahrenheit, and this results in a softening of the metal. It's a key process in making more complicated and longer-lasting metals. And according to modern scientists, this type of iron casting technology wasn't developed until 1947 by British scientists, but the furnace found in China was made over 2,000 years earlier. The chariots of the gods. The cherubim appear numerous times in the Hebrew Bible, but they are never explained in great detail. Most religious interpretations describe the cherubim as a group of guardian angels who act as attendants or literal guards to the divine throne in heaven. In Genesis, it's the cherubim who placed the flaming sword at the Garden of Eden to protect the tree of life. While in the Psalms and other parts of the Bible, Yahweh, the name of the Jewish God, is said to ride upon these cherubim. And depending on how you want to interpret the words, these things can either be seen as actual angels or some kind of bizarre flying vehicle. In fact, the idea of the cherubim being flying vehicles isn't even new. In the 2nd century BC, there was a group of Kabbalah mystics who agreed the cherubim were some kind of ancient technology, a chariot which gods used to fly across the sky. King David, the author of the Psalms, even described thousands upon thousands of flying cherubim. It's obviously quite difficult to know for sure what was happening over 2,000 years ago. The prophet Ezekiel, in his great vision, interpreted the cherubim not as vehicles, but as living beings. And if you read his words closely, it sounds kind of like an extraterrestrial encounter, and makes you wonder if the people of the ancient world saw an army of flying machines and just didn't know how to describe them properly. Thanks for watching! Which ancient technology impressed you the most? The mystery monoliths. In November 2020, a mysterious metal monolith showed up in Utah. A monolith is a large, single upright pillar, usually made of stone. It was discovered by state officials who at the time had been counting sheep from a helicopter. It was completely bizarre and looked an awful lot like the strange monolith from Stanley Kubrick's cult classic, 2001: A Space Odyssey. In the movie, the monolith is placed on the planet by extraterrestrials to jumpstart human evolution. But with the Utah monolith, it didn't appear to spark anything. It was in the middle of nowhere. Within a week, the monolith became a massive tourist attraction. Internet investigators used Google Earth to pinpoint its exact location and learned it had likely been sitting there since 2015. For over 5 years, the monolith probably sat in the desert and no one ever noticed it. And yet the moment it was swarmed by tourists, it vanished. A second monolith appeared in Romania. Days after, it was gone. At the start of December 2020, a third monolith was discovered in California at the peak of a hiking path on Pine Mountain. Within a short amount of time, a fourth monolith appeared in Pittsburgh and a fifth in Las Vegas. The one in Pittsburgh was just a publicity stunt by the owner of a shop to get more people to buy candy. But finally, a sixth monolith was discovered in the Netherlands on December 6, 2020. No other monoliths have been found since, and we don't know where these ones came from. We don't know if they were left behind by aliens or if it was some kind of elaborate hoax. If it was a hoax, it was pretty impressive to get all the monoliths in position around the globe within just days of each other. And for another matter, why had the first one been in the desert for so long? There's so many questions. Pluto's Gate. Pluto's Gate was discovered in 2013 in the country of Turkey. This archaeological site exactly matches the description of a supposed temple leading to the underworld. This temple disappeared from the history books in the 6th century, but in ancient times had been viewed as a very literal portal to hell. As the Greek philosopher Strabo described it, this space is filled with a vapor so misty and dense that you can hardly see the ground. This place was creepy. As far as the story goes, tourists traveled from all across the ancient world to visit this temple and see for themselves the place where you could descend into oblivion. It was one of the biggest conspiracies in Greek-controlled territories 2,000 years ago. Tourists and pilgrims who arrived here, even if they were skeptical, left fully convinced that the underworld was real. When they came upon the gates, they could purchase a small bird or some other animal, like we might purchase a hot dog at a ball game. Then they let the animals loose at the gate, where the creature would immediately die. The only people who didn't die after crossing the threshold of the temple were the priests. The thing about Pluto's Gate is that it's located directly above a crack in the ground. This fissure releases poisonous gas. When a small bird or other animal gets caught in the fumes, they immediately die. The only reason the priests were able to stand it for short periods was that they were incredibly high and hallucinating, but had grown somewhat used to it. The Aluches. In Maya mythology, there is a tale about small humanoid creatures, kind of like goblins, who cause immense chaos. They are called the Aluches, or the Little People, and the conspiracy of these mischievous beings has been passed down for centuries. They cause destruction, mayhem, and trouble wherever they go. Believe it or not, some people still think these things are real. They allegedly live around the Yucatan Peninsula and are completely invisible to humans, and can be found frolicking in the jungle and rooting around deep in caves. But of course, no one can actually see them. Not unless they wish to make themselves visible. And when they do, they look really bizarre. They have giant eyes like an owl, move quickly like a squirrel, and have various animal body parts. Pieces from a bird, parts of a deer, skin like an iguana, you know. They are exceptionally frightening figures, and sometimes leer at people in the dark with their red eyes just to make them scared for fun. While these creatures are more of a superstition today, the Maya wholeheartedly believed in them. They were said to appear to travelers as they journeyed through the jungle. An Alux would often ask for an offering, and if the traveler refused, they would gather others of their kind and cause trouble for the traveler for the rest of their journey. Sometimes they would even make them sick and then bite them at night. The Super Dad. You may have heard the strange claim that almost every person in the world is a descendant of the great Genghis Khan. Well, this isn't some kind of crazy conspiracy, and it's not an anecdotal piece of history. It's a very real thing, even if it is hard to believe. Genghis Khan was the ruler of the Mongol Empire between 1162 and 1227. He was a ruthless warrior famous for his sexual appetite. He sired so many children with so many different women, and he did it in so many places that he has countless descendants. A massive genetic study was done in 2013 and published in the science journal Nature. Researchers discovered that as many as 16 million living males are directly linked to the Mongolian ruler. So while that's not most people on the planet, it is a lot. National Geographic reports that nearly 8% of the men around the region of the former Mongol Empire have Y chromosomes that are nearly identical. Y chromosomes pass on chunks of DNA that rarely change over generations. Using random genetic markers, scientists can go back in time and trace them to when they first occurred, in this case, 1,000 years ago. What's really shocking is that the results weren't even a big surprise. The experts say this kind of thing has happened all throughout history. Powerful men often fathered children with as many women as possible to keep their lineage going. As the researchers said, this spread of patrilineage from father to son was by selection, not by chance. Genghis Khan was no exception. He had at least 6 wives and 500 concubines, which were all female rulers and royal family members of territories he had conquered, or gifts from allies and friends. And apparently, he made time for all of them. The Bear Lake Monster. The Bear Lake Monster is a conspiracy of a different kind. The creature in question is rooted in Native American folklore, with its first modern sighting in 1868. These days, nobody knows if the monster in the lake is a conspiracy, maybe like the Loch Ness Monster, or a myth that refuses to die. What we know for sure is that the monster has been spotted in Bear Lake, near the Utah-Idaho border, for hundreds of years. The Native Americans first told stories of a great sea beast living in the lake before Europeans ever showed up, something they called a water devil. This thing is supposedly like a marine serpent, extraordinarily fast and unlike anything else living in the area. When the settlers came, they learned the stories from the Native Americans. But the myth kept on going, and in 1868, sightings of the creature leaked into the local Desert News newspaper. Swimmers were allegedly being abducted by this beast when they got too close to the water's edge. It actually scared the residents from wandering into its depths. People wouldn't camp near the lake, and it became a quietly agreed-upon danger zone. Maybe that was the plan all along, to keep people away. Over the next century and a half, sightings continued to come in sporadically. A man named Mike Havertz was one of the most recent people to claim that he saw the beast. He said that while he was out on a boat with some friends, a horrible monster, something he couldn't see very well because it was underneath the surface, went by quickly, creating waves nearly 20 feet high. Yet no matter how hard the experts search for this monster, it's never been found. So I want to give a big shout out to Becca and Mary Wisdom. We will definitely have some more Antarctica videos for you soon. Keep an eye out for a surprise. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. The Patsy Conspiracy. The Patsy Conspiracy was a very real conspiracy by every definition. It was a secret plot by members of the wildly powerful Patsy family of Renaissance Florence to dispose of the Medici family, the rulers of Florence. It all started because of the Pope, the complex banking system, and a piece of land. Giovanni della Rovere, who had been appointed prefect of Rome, wanted to purchase the small town of Imola. His plan was to create a new papal state. However, Lorenzo de' Medici, head of the wealthy Medici banking family, wanted to purchase the town for himself. When Giovanni went to purchase the town, hoping to use funds from the Medici bankers, they turned him down, and so he went to the Pazzi Bank, and in the end, Imola was out of Lorenzo's reach. What happened next is almost unbelievable. The Pazzi family got the Medici family out of their way for good and went to Pope Sixtus for approval. And while the Pope didn't technically sanction the assassination, he said it would be in everyone's interest if the Medici bankers were gone. The assassination was a total miss. They killed Lorenzo's brother on April 26, 1478, but Lorenzo survived, and he secured the Medici's power in Florence while banishing the Pazzi family forever. The Knights Templar. The Order of the Knights Templar was founded on Christmas Day 1119 by Baldwin II, King of Jerusalem. What started as a group of French knights became an order of noble warriors protecting pilgrims in the Holy Land, and later on, an army of extraordinarily wealthy Christian militants who waged war against those who would threaten the Holy Land. They continued fighting until they were betrayed, slaughtered, and destroyed beyond repair in 1291. All these years later, the Knights Templar are still a source of major conspiracy theories. But what you might not know is that the conspiracy theories started a very long time ago, almost immediately after they were executed. In the 13th century, the German poet Wolfram von Eschenbach wrote a story about the Knights Templar being the guardians of the Holy Grail. This story has never gone away, even though it was probably just a tale told through a poem. And finally, it was the confessions tortured out of the Knights Templar by the minions of King Philip IV that made them infamous with the occult. They admitted to worshipping Baphomet, which inspired yet another tale in Henry Agrippa's 16th century book, De Occulta Philosophia. The stories surrounding the purpose of the Knights Templar, their religious knowledge, secrets, and treasures track them all over the world, and they are given credit for everything from hiding the Ark of the Covenant in Ethiopia to bringing treasure to Oak Island in the United States. Great Tartaria. The conspiracy theory of the ancient kingdom of Great Tartaria first showed up in Russia. It was Anatoly Fomenko who wrote a pseudo-historical conspiracy theory book called New Chronology. This was where the idea of Great Tartaria started, but it has since spiraled way out of control. Great Tartaria was a highly advanced civilization spread across the entire world, with its heartland being in Russia. Buildings like New York's Penn Station, the Singer Building, and even the grounds of the 1915's World Fair were all supposedly part of the Tartary Empire. Pretty much any Gilded Age building is said to be a remnant of this great empire. And just wait, because it gets even crazier. The theory says that a great flood of mud wiped out most of the ancient world prior to World War I. World War I and World War II were partially fought to help erase all evidence of the Tartary architecture still standing in Europe. These people believe that a great Russian empire already dominated the earth centuries ago, building every major structure from the White House to the Pyramid of Giza. The theory is really the canon of architecture, according to Bloomberg's Zach Mortiz. It's about as realistic as the earth being flat. The Scottish Freemasons. The Freemasons are a very real organization, one of the oldest and most widespread fraternities in the world. Members of the Freemasons have included names such as George Washington, Harry Houdini, Winston Churchill, and even Mormon founder Joseph Smith. And because these guys are so secretive, it's no surprise that they are at the center of quite a few conspiracy theories. The earliest known document of the Freemasons being wrapped up in some bizarre conspiracy comes from 1786. It was claimed that the Freemasons worked together with the Illuminati and the Order of Jesuits to form the New World Order. This order would discreetly manipulate world events into whatever the group saw fit. And here's a little juicy information. On the US $1 bill, the Latin phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum has been printed since 1935. The direct translation is New World Order. There is no definitive proof the Freemasons are behind every major event since the 1700s. However, there's no proof against it either. These guys have been around since the medieval days, originally formed as a group of Scottish stonemasons. So now conspiracy theorists are having a blast. The vampire Carmilla. If you were to ask who is the original vampire, most people would probably answer with Dracula. While the character of Dracula was probably inspired by Ivan the Terrible, there is a completely different story about vampires in old literature. Years before Dracula was ever written by Bram Stoker, there was another vampire story. Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu is the original vampire novelist. He wrote the novella Carmilla in 1871. His book was a first-person account given by a young Englishwoman named Laura who fell prey to the beautiful vampire Carmilla, another lady. In this original vampire tale, Carmilla and Laura fall into a steamy romantic relationship. The maidens in the nearby towns are afflicted by a strange illness. They all eventually die, and then Laura becomes sick. She also has a recurring nightmare that a giant cat is attacking her in the night. The giant cat turned out to be Carmilla, her lover, who is also a vampire. Carmilla is eventually hunted down, staked through the yard, decapitated, and then burned. It's a pretty gruesome story, and many argue that this was the original that influenced the legend of Dracula. But since Dracula was written in Victorian times, when society was seriously suppressed and held under extremely strict moral laws, it faded into obscurity and never got famous. But when Bram Stoker's account of a male vampire came out, it became an enormous success. The big difference was that Carmilla was a lady, having relations with another lady. That was enough to cover the story up for 145 years, while Dracula reigned as the world's first famous vampire, when in fact it was Carmilla. Thanks for watching! What's your favorite vampire story out there? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time. Bye!